Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Hardware Podcast. My name's Jackson Danner alongside my good friend Omar Borja. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but we're going to preview week 6 today. Somehow is absolutely flown by. If you're listening to this, it is in early October. That or you're going back to before week 6 and you already spoiled the results by by listening to this in the far future. But Omar, how you doing?
I am good. Things are good. Man, it's just crazy how fast the season's progressing. It's already
Yeah.
October 1st, and I'm ready to, start drinking some eggnog while making these bowl projections as we hit October. And of course, we're talking beforehand about weeknight football coming back. Well, Tuesday and Wednesday night football coming back because we've always had Thursdays. But yeah, so I mean, I'm doing well.
Yeah, I can't wait. Now we obviously have Conference USA games. It's not just Maction that's here. So we kick off the early midweek slate a week from this week with Florida or FIU at Liberty and then New Mexico State at Jacksonville State. Looks like are going to be the first games. One each, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday. So excited for those. Obviously, we always have Thursday night football. So, and then Friday we're gonna start seeing multiple games. I just real quick unscheduled. I want to talk about the Fox Friday nights. Have you watched those? It seems like they're really leaning into it being a marquee matchup, and I believe it's usually Tim Brando on the call, which is always a pleasure. What have you thought about that if you've watched it?
Yeah, so I watched Rutgers Washington last week. I don't think it's typically marquee matchups, but it's ending up that way with how the teams are playing this year, especially Rutgers going to
Not
4-0.
marquee yet, but they're not putting nothing games on there too, right? They're trying to make it be a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they really are. They're putting the promotional juices there too. I also wonder too, how much time until we start seeing Ohio State and Michigan as a road team. I know Michigan has historically objected to playing Friday games, but I know back in 2019, Ohio State played Northwestern on the road on the Big Ten Network on a Friday. So I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing Ohio State. I'm pretty sure I know Penn State's played a couple Friday night games in the past against a less than marquee Big Ten opponents. But I really like the way that the games are going, and I just think that it's just the luck of the draw, where because the Big Ten is so big, a lot of these teams are stacking up on good win-loss records and coming into these games with solid resumes and making these games impactful.
So I can't remember where I saw this. I'm just doing a quick Google search and can't find it immediately at least. Wasn't there some rule that there has to be a set by Fox that there has to be a certain number of teams that play? I can't remember. Like they can't just use the same schools to play every Friday night.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't know. I feel like I know what you're talking about, but I would have to dig deep into a lot of the, I guess, the broadcast lingo. I like to look at mattsarsports.com,
yeah.
his blog about that. But there's various rules really. A lot of the stuff happening behind the scenes too. As if you'll notice this week, Ohio State, Oregon, which I think that game's in Autzen. That game is Big Ten Saturday night, and I think NBC had traded for the first pick of the I guess their number one draft pick for Big Ten control games was that game. So there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a rule like that.
Yeah, so the only thing I can find was that Michigan State, Oregon, Purdue, Rutgers, UCLA, and Washington all have to play two Friday night games, one at home, one on the road for each. That's the only thing I can find, but that's not what I remember. I feel like I remember it being like some sort of rule that each team has to carry a minimum. But regardless, that's not what we came here to talk about, or probably what you came to listen about. We'll talk a couple things up from last week. Ashton Jeanty, man, how about his performance again? And it wasn't just a week 1 fluke. Not that he hasn't been productive since then, but man, just video game numbers, video game on freshman mode. It's ridiculous what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he's definitely played his way into the Heisman discussion because not only is he racking up 200 yards per game, he's doing it with 10 yards per carry. And against the competition that he's faced, especially Oregon. You look at the Oregon game particularly, he had over 9 yards of carry. He had 190 yards, over 190 yards. You look at some of the teams that Oregon has shut down offensively, UCLA, even though UCLA is not that great, but Oregon State, namely, too, a very solid team out there in the Pac-2. It's truly impressive, and it'll become even more impressive in the Mountain West with some of the weaker defenses in the Mountain West, because the Mountain West looks considerably weaker this year. You don't have San Diego State at the top. UNLV is really the only test, and I think they probably have the best defense. I think that's probably the best defensive test
Oh,
they'll face.
that defense is legit, dude. Like UNLV's defense is really good, and that'll be a challenge. But everything else, man, like he already has if I'm doing my math right, 140-yard lead on second place for most rushing yards, which is just
Yeah,
insane. When you're 140 yards is a lot in the context of not even 900 yards, right? So
exactly.
it is, yeah, it's insane what he's doing right now. Caleb Johnson is number two at 685. Then there are only two more running backs in the country with over 600. And meanwhile, Jeanty has 845, which is ridiculous. So
Exactly. And looking at the path to the Heisman for Jeanty, he's got a Friday night game against Boise State, or sorry, against San Diego State. Friday night game against them, and he's also got a Black Friday big noon CBS game against Oregon State, which could really place him into the good graces of the Heisman race. If you remember Black Friday in 2018, Kyler Murray essentially won his Heisman on Black Friday against West Virginia, had his Heisman moment. So Ashton Jeanty, I think he'll find his way in New York if he continues, because the toughest defensive test is UNLV. Everyone else, Nevada, not great. San Jose State, that'll be a tough game for Boise State's defense. I just don't think the
yeah.
Spartans have what it takes on defense to stop Jeanty. But man, talk about star power in that game. Emmett Brown having such a nice year. Nick Nash, man, Nick Nash, a holdover from that 2020 conference champion team for San Jose State. This man started off as Nick Starkel's backup and started a game in his place, and now he's a backup quarter. And now I'm sorry, now he's probably, I think he's a leading receiver in the country in several categories, including catches and yards. So that's a bit of a tangent, but that's to say that Ashton Jeanty's path to New York is very clear. And I guess it's the segue to our next topic, should Jalen Milroe slip up, could potentially find himself like in the top two, maybe winning the darn thing. But talk about an epic game with Jalen Milroe in Alabama.
And for you to say that any game in the SEC was epic is it had quite the accomplishment to do that. No, it was a fantastic game. I will admit I did tune away in the third quarter just because there were other games on, right? And so kept an eye, including Ashton Jeanty's game. And then quickly moved back when I realized what exactly was happening. I couldn't believe that Georgia actually had the lead. That was just an insane one-play drive by them. And then I mean, we all saw the game and just how incredible it was. But for Jalen Milroe to not be rattled by just having no success, really from halfway in the second quarter all the way to that next to last drive, or I guess the last drive for Alabama in the game, it was incredible. So Jalen Milroe. Now, Carson Beck, if Georgia does find a way to win that game, that was definitely one of his best showings, right? I obviously the interception at the end is tough, and he played just horrible in the first half. But man, to get yourself back in the game on the road like that's not. I'm not a Carson Beck fan necessarily. I think he is a little bit, playing with the talent around him. But man, there were some throws that the one that always will jump out to my mind in that game by Carson Beck is the one where he looks the safety to bring the safety down, and it sets up the slot receiver to run deep post and just hit perfectly. I thought that was the one play touchdown drive, if I remember right. So yeah, but Jalen Milroe absolutely going to be the Heisman moment if he does end up winning it. Um, One game that is rarely talked about in the Heisman race is Air Force Navy. And we could find ourselves actually watching that for Heisman implications. Obviously, Army Navy could not be, but can Air Force Navy have any implications?
Yeah, so I want to discuss this with you because Blake Horvath had another great game for Navy, 309 total yards, this time doing it more so through the air. Of course, last week he had the huge 12 carry, 211 yard, 4 touchdown performance against Memphis. But this week did it more so through the air. I think he completed 9 for 11 passes for 225 yards, including not one, but two 70-plus yard touchdowns. One to the Olympic trial runner, Nathan Kent for Navy, which you don't really get world-class speed at Navy all that often for reasons that I guess for the reasons that you see talent avoiding the service academies, and another one to Eli Heidenreich. So Horvath did it through the air mostly, also ran for 84 yards. But this week, Air Force plays Navy on CBS. Of course, every leg of the Commander-in-Chief's trophy is on CBS on the main network. And of course, this one will be at noon. And I have to look at the competition this week because Big Noon Kickoff is kind of lackluster, if I'm not mistaken, this week. I'd have to look because, of course, that's a big ticket. The noon SEC game is, I think it's Missouri versus Texas A&M, I want to say, which I'm checking the schedule right now.
That's
But
going to
there's
be
not
the
much
biggest
competition.
game. There's another one
UCLA,
that
Penn State. Yeah.
I will talk about a little bit later in SMU Louisville, but that's not going to be the college football fan off the street that's a casual. That's not going to be the game they're tuning into. As opposed to there is a chance, especially if Missouri Texas A&M gets ugly one way or the other. You could flip over to CBS or Paramount Plus if you have Sling, and watch Navy Air Force.
Exactly. So that game could end up being the most interesting game on network TV. Of course, SMU Louisville has interest being on ESPN, but that's cable. And of course, can't forget about the CW, but Wake Forest NC State lacks allure, especially since Wake Forest had just lost to Louisiana and is struggling. So I think Blake Horvath could potentially have a really good game and could really be on the minds of Heisman winners, or Heisman voters with this game. You look at last year, Air Force came into the Navy game. I think they started off 6-0. Yeah, they were 6-0 coming into the Navy game. Zach Larrier had arguably, of course, we all know what happened with Air Force. He had arguably had a Heisman moment to that point with this 94-yard touchdown pass to Dane Kinnaman on CBS in what was, I think, Air Force's only offensive touchdown because they got a pick six later on in the game, but their only offensive touchdown against Navy. And so there you go. There's Heisman moment, a great 94-yard touchdown pass. Maybe Horvath shines against Air Force and has a similar moment with the undefeated Navy team. The roles are reversed this year and on CBS against less than marquee games because usually Fox brings the heat with Big Noon Kickoff, but Penn State, UCLA is struggling to say least in the Big Ten. And Penn State, of course, they out of the big three, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State is probably the least marketable of all those teams to the national media just because they have struggled against Ohio State and Michigan. So a really big opportunity, I think, for Horvath, excuse me, not Xander Horvath, but Blake Horvath to make himself known in the Heisman race.
Absolutely. No, it'll be that'll be an interesting game to watch. And again, you can only hope for a blowout of some kind, right? Just so that the attention will be on Navy Air Force. Although I think that might end up being one of the biggest blowouts of the noon hour, just the way Air Force has played lately and the way Navy's offense has looked. So we will move on to our players of the week. Omar, I'll let you start. Who is your offensive player of the week from week 5?
So my offensive player of the week is must-see TV from Georgetown. We got Jimmy Kibble live, not Jimmy Kimmel, but Jimmy Kibble live. That is Kibble for the Georgetown Hoyas. And I know last week after the kickoff of the Ivy League season, I made a big deal about Columbia defeating Lafayette, the defending Patriot League champion and representative in the FCS playoffs for the conference. But Georgetown went out and beat Columbia, that same Columbia team that beat Lafayette. And the way it looks right now with Bucknell beating a Lehigh team that had a solid non-conference slate, finishing 3-1, with Georgetown beating Columbia and Columbia beating Lafayette, it looks like the Patriot League is wide open. Georgetown has never made the FCS playoffs, and Jimmy Kibble is arguably one of the best deep threats in the FCS, if not college football. Last year, he had 33 catches for 753 yards, way over 20 yards a catch. Against Columbia, Kibble continued it, this time with a little bit less yards per catch, but still the same impact with 10 catches for 164 yards against Columbia. So Jimmy Kibble live, must-see TV for Georgetown. And Georgetown could make a splash in. Sorry, that's a little blooper with cooking and everything. But yeah, Jimmy Kibble for Georgetown.
I was not familiar with Jimmy Kibble's game. Just looking at his on his Georgetown profile. Interesting to see. Came in 2022, saw action 8 games, some on special teams. Had a punt return for a touchdown in 2022. That you generally, I say this on the podcast, I feel like almost every other week, where if you can be a returner on special teams, whether I mostly mention it on running back, but for wide receiver too, really speaks to the vision you have, right? The ability to weave through traffic. Yeah, good stuff. I haven't watched any of Jimmy Kimmel, but I'll have to keep an eye on him now. Um, I'll go with my offensive player of the week. I'm actually going to name an offensive duo of the week instead, I should say. The Lindenwood Lions tandem in quarterback Nate Glantz and wide receiver Jeff Caldwell. Nate's been a little bit of a globetrotter, starting out at Iowa Western. Then he was actually a squad member at Iowa State, then went to McNeese State, where he played in 6 games, including one in the swamp. He has a bit of a Josh Allen style of play in that he throws great deep balls and he can make an impact when scrambling more so than designed runs. He also has thrown just some really fantastic balls outside the numbers. You don't always see, especially in these lower levels of competition, really great accuracy outside the numbers or really wide throws. And that's something that Nate Glantz has been fantastic at, just watching his uploaded film on YouTube. Wide receiver Jeff Caldwell, from this past weekend, he was on the receiving end of all 4 touchdowns in the second half that Lindenwood made to come back. And it wasn't even his first time having a 4 touchdown game. He had 4 against Western Illinois last year. So between that, leading the team in receptions and yards, he was first team all conference selection in 2023 and hopefully going to repeat that in 2024. So far in the year, he already has 508 yards, which is 83 yards short of his total from last year. So he's well on track to do that. Lindenwood continues in conference play this week against Tennessee State. So that should be a fun one to watch, especially when Lindenwood is on offense.
So I've heard that Lindenwood, from many people, that Lindenwood is a sleeping giant. They're situated in St. Louis. They are the FCS school in St. Louis. And especially with Missouri State moving to the FBS level, then I've heard that they can corner a lot of the St. Louis, the Missouri recruiting, at least for FCS talent. So I've heard great things about Lindenwood. Haven't really been able to see him. They beat St. Thomas 64-0. St. Thomas is having a bit of a rebuild year, but that is always a team that has hung around tough in or not really non-conference play, but PFL contender yearly. So Lindenwood looks like a legitimate contender in the Big South OVC. Definitely a team to watch. This game against Tennessee State, we're still waiting for the Eddie George breakthrough. Tennessee State has been close recently, but I mean, man, that is definitely a prime game in the Big South OVC.
Absolutely. No, can't wait to see that. Omar, if you want to go ahead with your defensive player of the week, who do you have from week 5?
Yeah, so I'm going to non-scholarship football, not the Ivy League, but the Pioneer Football League with Noah Benza for Morehead State, who had 3.5 sacks, 4.5 tackles for loss, and a dominant defensive performance for the Morehead State Eagles against Valparaiso, winning 17-5. And Morehead State, they've had a bit of a weaker non-conference schedule. They have 2 Subdivision 1 wins. They struggled against Central State on the opening Thursday night of the college football season, or I guess the week 1 Thursday night. But with Benza on defense doing great, he has 7 tackles for loss in 5 games. Definitely a contender for the Buck Buchanan Award. And Morehead State, like Georgetown, has never appeared in the FCS playoffs. And this year, with the vacuum created by St. Thomas's struggles, Davidson is always a mixed bag. And Drake is solid, but without St. Thomas near the top, the Pioneer Football League looks ripe for the taking for a new contender. So maybe on the strength of Noah Benza and that great Morehead State defense, or at least great against Valparaiso. Morehead State can reach their first FCS playoff appearance, but Noah Benza had an absolutely great performance of 3.5 sacks and 4.5 tackles for loss in the Pioneer Football League.
Fantastic performance. Always love talking non-scholarship football. For my defensive player of the week, I'm going with R. Mason Thomas, the edge from Oklahoma. Michael Hawkins Jr. is deservedly getting a lot of attention for winning his first career start at quarterback for OU. It was also Oklahoma's first ever interconference road game in the Southeastern Conference. But it was really Mason Thomas who was maybe the closer for this game. So if you didn't watch the game at Auburn, Oklahoma was up by only 3 points with about 2 minutes left while Auburn had the ball. Auburn faced a 3rd and 5 where Thomas got a 6-yard sack. They went for it again on 4th and 11. Mason got another sack again that essentially sealed the game. Oklahoma did get one more possession after an Auburn field goal, but R. Mason Thomas was just or after an Oklahoma field goal. But R. Mason Thomas was really the closer for that game. It's always the biggest players that make plays in the biggest moments, right? Especially at the edge rusher position. It's not a stretch to say that OU maybe doesn't win that game without him. So R. Mason Thomas, maybe not the total statistics for the game, but as far as I don't think there was a player more impactful in any one moment than Mason Thomas really sealing up that next to last drive against Auburn.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that's interesting about this Oklahoma team where they're not really doing it on offense like you would think. And it makes sense because Brent Venables, of course, is a defensive guy, but they're doing it on defense a lot. Maybe not as much early on in the going against Auburn, but they're doing it on defense. You've seen it, I mean, with in the Houston game, the offense struggled, but they kept Houston at bay. They really won that game. And you've seen it throughout the year. In fact, with Jackson Arnold being benched, maybe the tables turn and the offense takes more of a role, but I mean, it's just different seeing Oklahoma, I guess, maybe take on that character of an SEC squad where they're defense first instead of winning gunfights in the Big 12. So
I think it's gonna have to take a culture change, right? And Texas seems to kind of have turned that corner. Especially with Sark being in the SEC before, that probably helps. But no, Oklahoma, is going to have a change in this. They're heading in the right direction, right? If they're going to rely on defense a little bit more, just because Oklahoma, it's a good offense, but not good enough to win shootouts, right? With the Alabama and the Georgias of the conference. So
yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we will see, honestly. I mean, they still are in a position to be a playoff team. They need some breaks to go their way, but they are still in the discussion, really, despite the
oh
loss to
yeah,
Tennessee.
yeah, there it's close, man. That Tennessee game was rough, but they're not out. They're not
They
out.
got Texas. They could redeem themselves against Texas.
Oh, they absolutely could. Yeah, against the non-UT of the conference. I
Yeah,
don't know
I'm
if
not
you
going to
saw
get
that
into
whole
that.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have enough. I don't have enough skin in the game to get into that. So I'll go into my HBCU player of the week. So I got Jaden Sutton for Delaware State. In week zero's preview, you heard me sing the praises, sing the gospel of Marquis Adams, who was still having a great year. In fact, Marquis Adams was fantastic against Campbell in a losing effort. 4 touchdown passes, no interceptions, amazing. And Delaware State looks like a team that can play spoiler in the MEAC race in the 5-game sprint of the MEAC season in the Race to Celebration Bowl. But Jaden Sutton continued that great tradition of Delaware State running backs recently, because we know Delaware State loved to run the ball in the Rod Milstead era. Well, they thrive with a play action game. Of course, Thomas Bertrand Houdon playing in the CFL for all of our CFL fans out here, a product of Delaware State. Jaden Sutton had 20 carries for 198 yards and 2 touchdowns against Campbell. And this week against St. Francis, Pennsylvania, who is 1-4 out of the Northeast Conference, but their only win is somehow against Kent State. He can have another amazing week for the Hornets, who look vastly improved and look like a year away. I think, in my opinion, they could be next year's Howard, a team that comes out of nowhere and kind of causes some trouble in the MEAC and then ends up winning the conference the following year. But Jaden Sutton is a senior this year, so you should be able to see him. I think if he continues on the track he's going, you will see him in Nolens out in February in the HBCU Legacy Bowl. So I'm very excited for what Sutton's doing. And honestly, it just with Sutton performing so well, it makes Marquise Adams even more of a running threat. He had 56 rush yards and 11 carries. I think 56 on 11 carries against Campbell. With Sutton being the other option of, I guess the other option in a read option, then Marquise Adams is even more of a threat for the run. So nothing but great things to say, even in a losing effort to a CAA school like Campbell.
I haven't watched Delaware State so far this week, but is their offense still kind of they have lots of split sets with one running back where it's a lot it's very run heavy, but you also have wide receivers like very much on the perimeter. Is that still kind of how it is, or?
Oh, I think it's a little bit more spread oriented. Like, I don't think it's as much power oriented, really. From what I remember, because I didn't watch much of the Campbell game, but I did watch the Hawaii game extensively. But that was all the way in week 0. But it was definitely spread oriented, not much of a power game. But Sutton brings that really electric playmaking element that they really have lacked with their running backs. The running backs have been great, but not huge playmakers like Sutton.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Well, for my HBCU player of the week, I'm gonna go with Deandra Duhart, the running back from South Carolina State. He was a transfer from Benedict College, who has had 2 touchdowns or 100 yards in 3 of his last 4 games. And the one game he didn't accomplish either of those, he still averaged 7.5 yards a carry. There's not many highlights of him online, but the ones I did find mostly on X, his running style reminded me so much of Isaiah Pacheco. Just his footwork, his contact balance. He's not Marion Motley running right at you, right? But he has the vision to find some of those hidden yards. And he has the body to absorb hits when he can't avoid contact. So, Deandra Duhart, a running back to continue to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just great we're talking about the strong running back core in black college football, really. I'm trying to think like the last like great running back prospect. I mean, it honestly actually not even the last great one, but there's just a lot of great running back prospects. Eden James out of Howard having a great year. I know last year Philip Wheeler, I think Philip Wheeler got a free agent deal out of Howard as well for the Chicago Bears, if I'm not mistaken. And just in recent memory, other HBCU backs, of course, Tariq Cohen comes to mind.
Yeah,
Sadly, his career
big
didn't
one's a big
come
one.
out. Yeah,
Alfonso
didn't.
Graham.
Yeah, Alfonso Graham as well. I'm not sure where he's playing nowadays, but he has amazing potential, honestly, as return specialist and as a versatile pass catching back and sort of a playmaker out of the backfield. So just a great. There's always been a great crop of running backs in black college football. Even I'm also thinking too for the Orlando Guardians, John Maine Martin, who played in the 2023 XFL season for the Orlando Guardians. John Maine Martin too. So definitely always a strong crop of backs to come out of the HBCUs. Uh, with that being said, would you like to move on to our games of the week, Jackson?
Yeah, so my first game of the week to watch, I'm gonna go with Duke at Georgia Tech. Really, because this could be the third hardest game left for the undefeated Blue Devils. They have Miami on the road and SMU at home, which I think are going to be the toughest two. But other than that, it's just at Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, at NC State, and Florida State. So if Duke finds a way to win this game and they win the other games that they're supposed to, and they don't get completely blown out by Miami, I think you have a fair argument for a playoff bid, right? Malik Murphy, their quarterback that transferred from Texas, he already has 11 touchdowns on the year, which is tied for 10th most. I don't know if you remember last year, but at Texas, when Malik was still for the Longhorns, he was the second string there, not Arch. So clearly, he has the tools in the toolbox. On the other side of the ball for Duke, it's been kind of a no-name defense that has been very productive and still has a lot of depth. They have 7 players right now with double-digit solo tackles. They have 6 players with at least 1.5 sacks. Through week 4, they've had a 91.4 PFF coverage grade, which is just elite if you're not familiar with the grading system. And they're allowing only 16 points a game. Georgia Tech had what we thought was a defining win versus Florida State in week 0. They haven't had much to show for it since. Haynes King has continued to play clean football, but they have just, as a team, been unable to play from behind with this style offense. This game's going to be 8 Eastern on the ACC network. A huge story to follow this week is going to be if Duke's top wide receiver Jordan Moore will be available. He has a knee injury right now, is listed as questionable. But Duke Virginia Tech, man, I think it could be an interesting game. And again, if Duke wins this one, and they are the betting favorite to go on the road and win at NC State, man, you're looking at a team that might be 10-2 going into the playoff. Or sorry,
Yeah, it's
not
crazy.
10-2, but very up there.
I'm gonna be honest, I did not realize Duke was 5-0 because I had counted this team out many a time. Week 1 against Elon, I noticed they were struggling against Elon in the CAA, 126-3. Of course, we know about the double overtime thriller by the lake out there against Northwestern in week 2. Again, I'm like, this team is not great. But following week against UConn, that's another game that I saw and I was like, I don't know about Duke this year, but they have beat everyone in front of them. They don't make it pretty. It's exciting most of the time, especially last week against Duke with their or against North Carolina with their comeback victory. Against Georgia Tech, they're going to need to play, I think, up to the level of competition. They can't play
Yeah.
down against
Yeah,
Georgia Tech.
they've been playing down to the level of competition, right? But if you play down, you also have to play up. So
Yes, exactly. Like that's just the thing too. I mean, yeah, they got to play up against Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech as well. They've looked good for most of the year. Of course, Florida State in retrospect isn't a great win, but narrow loss to Syracuse. Louisville looks great as well once again. Rumors of their demise have been premature despite the loss of Isaac Guerrero and Jawar Jordan. So, I mean, Georgia Tech has looked good, and those are only 2 losses against Syracuse and Louisville. So this one is definitely a great one. That's a great catch. I was overlooking that. I'm actually looking forward to next week, though. I'm not counting out Georgia Tech in this one, but Duke has never beat Florida State. I don't think there's a better year than this year for Duke to beat Florida State.
oh
So
yeah,
that's definitely one to
that's
watch.
I'm counting that as one of the ones that
Yeah.
they're supposed to win, right? And man, like one thing that I didn't even really think of, but now that I'm thinking like going down the line, if they win this game and their only losses are to Miami and SMU, right? And they go into the conference championship, let's say hypothetically against could be Clemson, right? Could be Miami. We'll see. But if it is Clemson somehow, dude, remember what they did last year? Like they can. It was a 21-point victory if memory doesn't serve you. They will. They have a chance, man. Like I like this team.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, like we said, they play up to the competition and they rise up, especially against Miami. Even though Miami though played down this past week and were saved once again by the league office, like they were in 2015 against Duke. Like that's something I mentioned. They're saved by the ACC league office. But that being said, I mean that one should be a good one if both teams continue their trajectories. So that's a
Whoever
great
their
catch.
guys are in Charlotte, sure bailed them out.
Exactly. That's a great catch for sure, Jax. I was not aware of that one because I have 2 FCS games in a group of 5 games. So my first FCS game, I love the neutral site games. I love my HBCU Classic this week at venerable historic Lad People Stadium out there in Mobile. We got Jackson State versus Alabama A&M for the Gulf Coast Challenge. And Jackson State, they won their first conference game. Of course, the media circus is not there with Deion Sanders. This is not a team to write off, especially with a wide open SWAC this year. Florida A&M still looks like the favorite, and the SWAC still does divisions. But Jackson State, Florida A&M once again looks like the game of the year. But they're not to look ahead to that game because they have an Alabama A&M team that loves to sling the ball as expected, as serves recent memory. We have 2 good quarterbacks in this game. We got Jacobian Morgan, who had 4 touchdowns who accounted for 4 touchdowns against Texas State the previous week, and this name was pulled out of the archives for me doing research for this. We got Cornelius Quad Brown for Alabama A&M, the Georgia State transfer who took Georgia State to a bowl win in 2020 in the pandemic season. They beat Western Kentucky that year, and he was a 2021 opening day starter before he was benched for Darius Granger for Darius Granger. But
Uh,
Brown, you kind of broke up there, Jackson. I didn't really quite catch that.
Oh, was that against like the Austin Reed days of Western Kentucky? I can't remember the exact years he was there.
That's further back to 2020. That's
Go
against
back.
Tyrell Pogrom. That's the Tyrell Pogrom days of Western Kentucky, the
Oh man,
pandemic
we're
year.
really going back, aren't we?
So yeah, he is playing right now for Alabama A&M. He's got 5 touchdowns this year. His best game was against a subdivision one opponent in Kentucky State. He had 4 touchdowns. He's got 5 touchdown passes this year. So good quarterback matchup. It's great to see a classic out there at Lad People Stadium. And it's good to see just a historic stadium on showcase out there in Mobile.
Absolutely, that will be a good one to watch. Yeah, like you said, we love neutral site football, especially love it when it's in stadiums so you can actually fill up, right? As much fun as Texas State Sam Houston was last week, didn't come close to filling up NRG. So, Omar, it is a very exciting week for college football. We mentioned it last week. Ivy League Friday nights are back, man, and I can't wait. We start off with New Hampshire at Harvard. So through 2 games so far, Harvard quarterback Jaden Craig has 5 passing touchdowns and 1 interception. Through his first 43 attempts last year and 53 attempts, he had 4 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So already a significant improvement. For New Hampshire, they had a disappointing but expected 54-point loss to UCF in the bounce house to start, but they have not looked back since. They have since won at Holy Cross and multiple score victories against Stonehill College and Bryant. So excited for Ivy League Friday nights to be back. It's an American tradition. So
Yeah, absolutely. And this game fascinates me because Harvard and New Hampshire have not played since 1939, I believe, despite being in bordering states. It's just really crazy how these two schools have never
I
played.
did not know that part. That makes it even better.
Exactly. And you have two stalwarts of the New England football scene with New Hampshire is almost like a mini cradle of coaches. If you know about the cradle of coaches from Miami of Ohio, Chip Kelly coached there, Ryan Day coached there. In fact, Ryan Day was able to get New Hampshire a game at the Horseshoe, and they are, I believe, just the third or the fourth FCS team to play at the Horseshoe, joining Florida A&M, Youngstown State, and Grambling next year. Whenever that New Hampshire game happens, so got the mini cradle of coaches there at New Hampshire. So just an exciting matchup for the Friday night, and it's on ESPN Plus. It's not on linear TV. It's on linear TV out in New England with the New England Sports Network. But just a great matchup, and Harvard needs this game after losing to Brown this past week. Because talk about the Ivy League looks so. This is the most exciting the Ivy League has been in years, I think, and it's only week 3 with the amount of games that happened. You had Yale get blown up by 24 to Cornell. You had, of course, Columbia lose to Georgetown. You had Harvard lose to Brown. So who wins the Ivy League? That's anyone's guess. Dartmouth even struggled against Merrimack. So top to bottom, I couldn't tell you. I could not rank the Ivy League top to bottom easily. It's really unpredictable.
And
So
remember, in an era of college football where the regular season has not been any less meaningful before, and it's not to say it's not going to be competitive, right? That sounds like a knock. It's not. It just means like genuinely at the FBS level, we've never had the regular season mean less. It is everything in the Ivy League. There is no conference championship game. Postseason play is banned. Like you have to decidedly win the conference by just being the best team in the regular season. Can't even be top 2. So it makes it even that much more fascinating. It will be tempting. I will admit I might throw this game on the second TV once Syracuse UNLV kicks off. I can't wait to see Kyle McCord go against that Barry Odom defense. But as still, I can't wait for just the starting back Ivy League Friday nights.
yeah, exactly. And staying in the Ivy League for my next game, we have a Nutmeg State battle between Yale and Central Connecticut State. The first meeting for these two Connecticut schools, and Yale needs this game desperately after what happened last week against Cornell. Their 43-27 loss to the Big Red. They play a Central Connecticut State team that will be game. They will be motivated to play arguably one of the flagship programs of the state, if not the flagship. I guess with the exception of UConn, probably the second most popular, the second most renowned. I'd say probably more renowned than UConn, but the second most popular program in the state, the most tradition rich. Central Connecticut State gave UMass a run for their money on the road. They lost only 35-21. Of course, special teams aided that a lot. Special teams and a timely interception that put the ball, I think, on the UMass 25 benefited Central Connecticut State, made that game closer than it seemed, but it was still a great showing for a Northeast Conference school. Starting for starting for Central Connecticut State as well is former UMass starter Brady Olson. So there is talent at quarterback there. There's Division I talent there, FBS talent at quarterback there. And Yale has to be careful with this one that they don't get caught sleeping against Central Connecticut State. And I think this game will be closer than people anticipate. And if Central Connecticut State wins, it'll be just a great moment for the Northeast Conference, a conference that has had a great year so far non-conference, beating with St. Francis beating Kent State for the second FBS win ever. This would just add to it. And people are saying that the Northeast Conference looks very competitive this year. I think Long Island as well had a very solid performance against Rhode Island. Rhode Island, a team that's ranked in the FCS top 25 this year. So just a great year all around for the conference. And Wagner, even count Wagner for that matter. Wagner beat that Delaware State team that I was just talking about by 23. So could be a landmark event for the Northeast Conference.
No, we can't mention UConn on the show without talking about what they did to Buffalo last week, especially after what Buffalo did to Northern Illinois the previous week. It was just that came as a shocker for me. I think Skylar Bell is still catching touchdowns out there. Just ridiculous what they did against what was a pretty solid defense, I thought. But anyways, for my last game of the week to watch, I'm going to go with SMU at Louisville. SMU coming off of an impressive win versus Florida State. I know FSU is awful, but that defense held DJ Uiagalelei to less than a 50% completion percentage, and he doubled his interception total for the season. So on offense, though, SMU has the 16th best total offense and the 8th best scoring offense on the year. If there's one thing on offense that they do need to do a little bit better, it's probably control the clock, especially for this game. They've averaged 25 minutes of possession a game, and you want to keep this game as short as possible, in my opinion, when going against Louisville. On Louisville's side of things, Tyler Shaw has been very efficient. I played a clean game against Notre Dame. His only regret, I'm sure, is just not sliding after his 40-yard run off the read option about halfway through the first. But it's a little bit painful to see a Red Raider playing so well on offense. But that's the portal for you now. So as far as Louisville's defense, they've had the 5th best third down defense in the country, which is great for a Ron English-led defense. They're only allowing 16 points per game. One more stat that's fascinating to me is they have 6 turnovers on the year. 4 of those are from forced fumble recoveries, which is just not an average ratio, I feel like you see compared to interceptions. So excited to see what this SMU rush game does against this defense that's held its ground enough. But considering some impressive numbers, they were not able to win the game at Notre Dame.
You saw I was trying to pull up some of Tyler Shop's stats because it feels like this team is more explosive, really, because Jack Plummer was a good quarterback for Louisville last year, but more of a game manager for sure. Shop has 11 touchdowns this year, and he has almost half, or he has half of Jack Plummer's touchdown output because right now they're 5-0, or sorry, they're 4-1, excuse me, in 5 out of 14 games. So in about a third of the games, he has half of Jack Plummer's 2023 touchdown output, which is encouraging to see because, of course, you think about Louisville last year, you think Garendo and Jordan over and over again, and teams wanted Jack Plummer to beat them. Of course, last week as well, you mentioned the slide. They also had the ill-advised delay of game on the 4th and 1 that turned into a 4th and 6, and just mental mistakes. But Louisville definitely, again, like I kind of wrote them off. I wrote them off as a middling ACC team, but they are very much a contender in that conference this year. And this game, who would have thought that SMU Louisville will be one of the ACC games of the year? That's not to discount either program, but I don't think anyone thought that either program would be in a position to be in the driver's seat for the ACC.
No, we definitely did not. And we saw kind of a 2-back set last year. They had 2 NFL running backs, so it's deservedly so. But they've absolutely done running back by committee again, right? They have 3 running backs with 20 plus carries, and they have 5 different backs with a rushing touchdown. Excuse me, 6 different backs with a rushing touchdown, which is insane. So. Very much. I think I talked about it last week on the pod too. This is a very similar offense, but just completely, like, if you knew everything about Louisville's offense from last year, none of it would apply this year. Almost, it's just a complete facelift. So the fact that they've been able to put up that kind of production despite that is impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Their consistency is amazing. Like Jeff Brom is one of the best in the game. Absolutely. I think he is just with the body of work he's done, not just at Louisville so far, it's alma mater, but at Purdue, taking them to a conference title game, having them beat Ohio State, excuse me, on Saturday Night Football, a top five Ohio State team. His body of work speaks for itself. It really does. Excuse me. So for my last game of the week, we got primetime ESPNU. We got ULM versus James Madison. Who would have thought that this game would have Sun Belt Conference implications? Kudos to the ULM Warhawks for such a great start this year. They beat the defending champion Troy Trojans. Even though Troy's in the midst of a rebuild, especially on offense, things are kind of rough on offense for the Trojans, but they beat them 13-9. And Bryant Vincent is coaching angry. I'm not sure if that's a term that anyone's ever used, but you look at week 2 against UAB, against a school that should have hired him, the school that he was interim coach for a whole year when Bill Clark stepped down for health reasons, took them to a bowl game, won that bowl game, finished 7-6, but UAB instead opted for Trent Dilfer instead, which he's not coaching at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa, but he's not doing a great job at UAB at the moment. I'm not sure if you caught the whole press conference skirmish, or not skirmish, I shouldn't say. There was no physical altercation, but the whole press conference controversy with him essentially saying that UAB was less in their presser, but that's neither here nor there. But Bryant Vincent is coaching angry. And if you look at Bryant Vincent, if you look at that ULM offense, you can see shades of that UAB scheme that he ran with, that I guess that Bill Clark ran with him at the helm. Very running back heavy. Ahmad Hardy ran for 106 yards on 27 carries. Not really any explosive plays. His longest run was a 12-yard run, but he anchored a ULM offense that only threw, I think it was 11 passes against Troy. And the week before that against 2 weeks before that against UAB, they only threw 16 passes. So they love to run the ball like a UAB team under Bill Clark, under Bryant Vincent would. Of course, Dwayne McBride comes to mind, Spencer Brown, great backs like those come to mind. This is a team that looks like UAB did in their heyday under Bill Clark in the late 2010s, early 2020s. And they're going to need to chew clock against James Madison because this James Madison team can score points in bunches. They're doing absolutely amazing this year. Everyone knows about North Carolina, but under the radar, they just beat Ball State 63-7.
No,
Like,
North Carolina got them on the radar, but they've been putting up points for a minute now. So
well, it's weird because, and I think that this JMU team has a tendency to play down. As silly as it seems, like the week before they beat North Carolina by 20 and dropped 70 on them, they almost lost to Gardner Webb. Like Gardner Webb was driving and had a goal-to-go situation and could have beat James Madison. So maybe ULM game plans well and stops that offense and really has a chance here, and then puts themselves in the driver's seat in the Sun Belt West. Maybe that happens. I can see a reality where it happens. It'll just take almost a perfect game, I think, for ULM to do that.
fun fact, I've met Bryant Vincent on multiple occasions, actually, when he was out in Central Texas recruiting. So yeah, no, that'll be a fun match. I did not realize that ULM was doing as well as they have been. So that'll be something I keep an eye on for the rest of the season. So
Yeah.
that's all I've got, Omar. Anything else you want to add on before we hop off?
Yeah, not exactly a game of the week, but definitely one that I'm watching. Excuse me, a lot of people probably are watching as well. Would be Nebraska versus Rutgers, where Rutgers is 0-6 all time against Cornhuskers. This is probably one of their best chances to get their first win. Shout out to my friend Rutgers grad Maddie Waters and fellow New Jersey Generals fan. We've had on the podcast a couple of times. I'm rooting for you for sure to beat Nebraska for the first time. And at stake is an appearance on Big Noon Kickoff against Wisconsin because they are a 6-day selection. It's them and Wisconsin. It's Rutgers, Wisconsin, and another game in the running for Big Noon Kickoff. And Big Noon Kickoff has never been to Piscataway, so I'm definitely rooting for that. I would love to see Matt Leinart and the whole gang. Matt Leinart, I don't even really watch Big Noon Kickoff if I'm being real, but Matt Leinart,
No.
I think Gronk's a part of the crew, but see those guys at the birthplace. That's just poetic.
No, that's great. That's great. That'll be a lot of fun. No, I believe is it again where Big Noon Kickoff is at a 3:30 game? I can't remember.
No, it's I'm pretty sure it's at the noon game.
It's
I'm
at
pretty
the
sure.
noon game.
Yeah, I'm pretty
I
sure it
can't remember.
is.
I know last week with Colorado UCF they were out in Orlando, but
That was a
uh
load of baloney. They should have never been
how
there.
ugly do you think Auburn Georgia is gonna get?
I don't really have an opinion on that because you know how I feel about the
Yeah.
SEC. So whatever happens on that
Yeah,
field happens.
I'm like, man, I would not want to be whatever team it is playing Georgia after their first regular season loss in like, 5 years or whatever the streak was. But man, for the Deep South Ole Miss rivalry, that is going to get ugly quick, I feel like, in Sanford Stadium. But yeah, that'll be it for the week 6. Enjoy your college football weekend, and we will catch you next week.
Peace, love, and soul, everyone.